Welcome to another episode of Stories Sustain Us. I'm your host, Steven Schauer, and today we have an inspiring conversation lined up with someone whose passion for the environment has been shaped by his love for the ocean. Our guest today, Tom Alletson, is not only an avid surfer, but also a dedicated advocate for coastal management and integrated watershed management. Tom's journey has taken him from catching waves to leading initiatives with the Tweed Shire Council, a local government authority on the north coast of New South Wales in Australia. In this episode, we'll explore how surfing influenced his perspective on environmental issues, how his education in coastal management opened his eyes to the challenges facing our coastlines, and why community engagement is key to effective waterway management. We'll dive into important topics like sea level rise, the restoration of riparian zones, and the critical need for water quality monitoring to keep our communities informed and safe. Tom's belief in the interconnectedness of society and the environment underscores the importance of engaging with nature to foster environmental stewardship. Let me tell you a bit more about Tom before we drop into this interview. Tom Alletson is an environmental scientist who works for the Tweed Shire Council, which, as I just mentioned, is a local government authority on the north coast of New South Wales, Australia. This is a position he has held for over 20 years, and he's not going anywhere because it's his dream job. Tom's role is the Coast and Waterways team leader, which involves managing 40 kilometers of Pacific Ocean coast, or about 25 miles, and a large network of rivers and creeks in a beautiful and predominantly healthy, biologically diverse river valley. Tweed Shire Council's Waterways Management Program was recognized as a finalist in the 2022 International River Foundation River Prize, which I can tell you from personal experience is a very big deal. It's a very big international recognition. Tom has over 30 years' experience in managing rivers and the coast, and his lifelong commitment to protecting and restoring these areas is born of a childhood immersed in the Pacific Ocean and mangrove mud, surfing, fishing, and messing around in boats. Not much has changed for Tom, and his greatest inspiration is seeing kids make deep connections to nature by independently accessing and exploring it. Tom has also worked for 15 years as a volunteer coordinator of the Tweed Kenya Mentoring Program, a water initiative that he has helped run with friends from work and partner communities in a water-stressed region of Western Kenya. So whether you're passionate about the ocean, concerned about the impact of rising sea levels, or simply interested in how we can better manage our natural resources, this episode is sure to inspire you. So let's ride this wave with Tom Alletson and learn how we can all contribute to a more sustainable future here on Stories Sustain Us, where we are inspiring action through the power of storytelling. All right, Tom, welcome to Stories Sustain Us. How are you?
I'm good, thank you, Stephen. Thanks for having me on and the opportunity.
I appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Tell everybody, where are you joining me from? I'm in Seattle, Washington, and you're on the other side of the planet, I think.
Yeah. I live in a little beachside village called South Golden Beach. It's near a really popular town on the east coast of Australia called Byron Bay. And the easiest way to think about it is if you imagine a map of Australia, we're the most easterly point of Australia.
Fantastic. And we were chatting a little bit off camera about 2 hours away from Brisbane, you said?
About 2 hours south of Brisbane, probably 8 to 10 hours drive north of Sydney. And, we're a subtropical part of the world. Usually, it's really green rolling hills around here. Very, very beautiful part of the world, no doubt about it.
Yeah, I've been to both Sydney and Brisbane, and lovely towns. I would love to get back and visit again. So if I ever get there, I will definitely hit you up and let you know I'm close by. So
do so.
So the way this show works, we learn a little bit about you before we jump into the great work that you're doing over there in Australia. So Tom, tell me your story. What's your story from how'd you get to where you are these days?
How do you actually plot all that? I'm 52 years old, so the story is kind of, there's a fair bit to it now, but luckily I'm not so old that I don't remember it all. Where I'm at, I'm a pretty coastal person, The greatest sort of driving force in my life has probably been surfing. It could
Yeah.
probably sound a bit trite, but surfing has really, if there was one narrative through my life that's kind of everything else has really attached onto, it's been surfing. But I'm a dad. I got two kids. I got a 16-year-old daughter and a 13-year-old son. It's my wife and I's 22nd wedding anniversary today.
Oh,
Yeah, so
congratulations.
yeah, thanks.
Thanks for doing the
Um,
show.
yeah, no worries. Yeah, so I
Took
live
her out
about
for dinner
200.
afterwards.
Yeah, I live about 200 meters from the beach, from the Pacific Ocean, and I surf as much as I can. I like to try and keep really fit. I love fishing. I got a little boat. I go offshore fishing. I've just got back from 2 weeks surfing in Indonesia. I had a fantastic 2 weeks getting away with a mate to the
Nice.
island of Sumbawa. And where I'm at now is not very different from where I was at when I was sort of 17 years old, finishing school. I loved surfing. I loved fishing. I loved messing around in boats. I was chasing a range of girls rather than married to the best one for 22 years at that
Perfect.
time. And that, I guess, all falls back to my mum and dad, who were really interested in sailing.
Mm.
I grew up on small boats. We lived in a place very similar to the one that I do now, though we didn't have the ocean so close by. A big estuarine system up in Queensland, a place called the Gold Coast Broadwater. Had a
That's
number of
north of you, if I know the
just a
map
bit,
of
yeah,
Australia
just a little
correct,
bit
right?
north of where I live now.
Yeah.
There was a confluence of a number of rivers, so a big tidal delta full of mangroves and salt marsh, and as well as sailing in our little family yacht. By the time I was a teenager, me and a lot of my friends had what we all called tinnies, so small aluminium dinghies, with
Yeah.
about an 8 or 10 horsepower engine on the back of it, and we would just lose ourselves in the swamps, and we got up to all sorts of mischief. But there was never anyone around to offend while we did that. And luckily, despite a few scrapes, no one ever got into too much trouble or injured themselves too badly. And yeah, no, I've kind of like to think that I've really built on that, but that's still in many ways, what motivates me. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've been a dad looking after the family, but yeah, just staying connected to the creeks and rivers and the ocean.
So how old were you when you did got on your first surfing? Your first by yourself. Your first you were up and you were riding the wave for your first time.
Yeah, look, it's in this part of the world, kids start really young,
Sure.
and it's just part of the fabric of growing up. But once surfing really the bug bit, probably when I was about 16, 17
Okay.
years old,
Yeah.
and then I pivoted a bit from fishing, and running around in boats in the swamps. That was my main focus. But I think I realised that there was as much fun to be had on the beach in the clear water as there was out the back in the brown water.
Nice. So then I guess going from those childhood experiences, on the boat, and it sounds like a little bit more in the swamps when you were younger, preteen, early teen.
Mm.
What was going on in your school life at that time? Were you already kind of thinking about a career in that line of work, or
No, not really. Actually, when I was in my early or mid-teens, I was quite into the idea of joining the Navy.
Oh wow,
Um, I liked the idea of being on being on a big gunboat and being
sure,
part of that whole scene. And so when I got what you guys might call middle high school or the earlier high school, I I knew that I needed to do mathematics subjects to do that. My dad didn't support the idea of me going into the services because he'd done national service himself in the British Army, and he thought it was a pretty bad idea. But we worked it out that if I was going to get in, I had to do maths. But we also worked out that I was really bad at maths. In my first year of trying to do what we called Maths 1 and Maths 2 and physics, I completely bombed all of them. And I went up and saw the career guidance counsellor at my high school, and was sort of saying, okay, I need a plan B. I'm not going to be able to do the maths that I need to do to get into the sort of the officer training school for the Navy. And by that stage, surfing and being a rebellious teenager was also sort of becoming a little bit more of a theme in my life. I just could not get used to the idea that my school could tell me what colour shoes to wear. I was like, why is that important? And I think my dad saw that as a really great opportunity. He said, well, you think it's bad at school being told what colour shoes you can wear. Imagine being in the army where they'll jump down your throat, if you've got a button loose on your shirt or something like that. So Dad was exploiting that. And so I went up and saw the school guidance counsellor, and a poster on the wall, literally behind their head, had an ad for a local tertiary institution, the Northern Rivers College of Advanced Education, and they had a picture of a rocky headland with sort of swirling waves, and it said coastal management. And by that stage, I was into surfing. Yeah. I guess through listening to Midnight Oil, which is a band that you would know. Yeah. Getting that social environmental consciousness raised a bit as a teenager. I was starting to think about environmental issues, and I asked, "What's that? What's coastal management?" And the teacher literally said, "Look, I don't know. I just put the poster up there because it's a cool picture." And so they rifled through a filing cabinet and pulled out this course description for coastal management, and it was environmental science managing coastal ecological issues. And I went, "Well, that's me."
That's it.
That was it. And I signed up for that course, got into it, and as I say, the rest is history.
Nice. Yeah. Let me, before we talk a little bit more about that experience in university going forward, something you mentioned about your father's service, it triggers a question. Did your parents grow up in Australia as well, or did they move from Great Britain? When did your family lineage get into Australia?
Yeah, like many of us around here, I'm a half. Mum came from a little town about 2 hours west of where I live now called Boona, and her forebears were Scottish and English, but her family had been in the local area for 3 or 4 generations. But my dad was what they call a 10-pound pom, somebody who came out as an immigrant. Dad came out to Australia in 1966. He's from Wales, in the United Kingdom.
Yeah, in the UK, yeah. Okay, well, thanks. Yeah, appreciate it. I just was trying to put those puzzle pieces together when you talked about his service, and I was like, well, he clearly didn't grow up there, so I just wanted to kind of have a better understanding of that family lineage. So picking up after the guidance counselor, you kind of got an idea of where you're going and where you're heading. So pick that story up. Where did you end up doing your next education and moving on with life, wanting to protect the beaches?
So I left home. I just turned 18, moved down to a town not too far from here called Lismore, where there's a university called the Southern Cross University, and started my coastal management degree. And I didn't do particularly well in my undergraduate years. There were too many distractions. Life was too much fun. Sure. And I sort of took my high school attitude to my university studies, which was, do the minimum amount required to get the pass mark whilst having the maximum amount of fun at any other time that you could. I was living in a fantastic place called Lennox Head, which anyone who knows about surfing is one of the best surf breaks in the country. Working odd jobs, partying with my mates. But yeah, as I got through the course, particularly as I learnt, more of the subjects, and the thing that I think had the biggest impact on me when I was doing my undergraduate degree was a course called Natural Resource Economics,
Mm.
and understanding the links between money and finance, and goods and services, and surplus and scarcity, and externalities, and how all of these concepts of money actually affect the natural environment. And I think, as my awareness of the interconnectedness of society and the environment grew, I became more interested in it, and more able to see opportunities to not just fix things, but change things, and to try and sustain, or to try and improve natural resource management. But then, it wasn't until I actually started working that I think I found my strengths as a practitioner, and that was in in working with teams of people and working with other people.
Okay.
And using communication and relationship building as the actual real soft skills, but the more important skills to try and look after the environment.
Yeah. Tell me a bit more about that. Was that the first job like then, and how did you start to learn and see that you had those skill sets, those communications and interpersonal skills? Where did that kind of develop? Because I think you've been with the Tweed Shire Council now for 20 years, so there was jobs before that, I'm assuming, that you're talking about.
Yeah, so literally on the day that I finished university, I went about 8 hours north to an industrial town on the coast of Australia, which is called Gladstone, and I'd been told that there were lots of job opportunities up there, and at that time, the job market not that I was super aware of it as a really young person, but I wasn't getting a lot of encouraging sort of sounds from around me about getting a job in environmental science.
Yeah.
And I was desperate just to get some money behind me, having been a poor student for 4 years.
Yeah.
I had a lot of mates.
Early mid-90s, I'm guessing, timeline?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I had a lot of mates. Most of my mates went and did trades, and so they were earning money straight away. And I was, only earning money from, agricultural labouring or working in pizza shops and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so I was just desperate to earn a bit of cash, and I was quite happy to do some labouring. But I literally stumbled, and I went up to this industrial town where there was a lot of jobs to be had, and I picked up a job straight away helping a guy building swimming pools. And so this is tropical Queensland, and it was in December, and it was hot. So every day, like 35, 36 degrees.
Yeah.
And I went, in 24 hours from having like a hedonistic, jammy life of a student to being in the bottom of an 8-foot deep swimming, hole in the ground in someone's backyard in 36-degree heat.
Yeah.
Barrowing loads of concrete and fixing Rio steel and stuff like that. And I stuck it out for about 4 days. And it was really hard. I was like my body was pretty broken after just 4 days, even as a fit young person. So I went back to the employment registry and said, is there anything else? And they had a job in the local environment office, the local state environment agency office. They wanted a junior person to do a sort of an internship doing education about recycling. And so I got that, and I went into that state environment agency office, and within about 3 or 4 days of me starting the job, one of the senior people left. And then the boss sort of came to me and said, look, this is going to be an opportunity for you. You can step up to not just sort of like an intern position to an actual position, and I'm going to give you a full load of the work.
Yeah.
The only thing is that I'm going to pay you as an intern. Are you happy with that? And I said, absolutely, no worries.
Sure. Yeah.
Bring it on.
Give it to me. Yeah.
Give it to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that was another inflection point, a real sort of lucky opportunity, and I got to do lots of cool things. I was going out to some, really big industrial plants and doing water quality monitoring. There was a plant up there that made cyanide for use in the gold mining industry.
Yeah.
There was an alumina refinery, an aluminium smelter, a massive power station. Not too far from there now is one of the world's biggest coal loading terminals. And so, as well as going out to those big industrial facilities and learning some of the sort of the basic techniques of collecting water quality samples and stuff like that, I was also going around to schools and other local government offices, trying to encourage basic recycling. I really enjoyed going out to the schools. I had a worm farm. I guess you might know what a worm farm is. It's used for composting kitchen scraps, and sort of going out and showing little kids all these worms and various products, how things could be made from other things. And that was another real interesting learning for me, thinking about the circular economy and how it's one thing to recycle. It's one thing to put your aluminium cans, in the correct bin. But if there's nobody using those aluminium cans to make new products, it doesn't really work. Yeah, so I did that for 6 months and lived in a dingy little caravan and saved every penny I had. And then as soon as I had enough money for an airfare, I took off to Samoa in the Pacific for 3 months to surf and
continue following the passion.
Yeah.
Well, that does seem like a big point for you in your career, because I want to know what's happening next when you get back from the surfing trip. But I appreciate that 6 month period of taking on that workload, even though it wasn't the pay that the other person was making, obviously. But it certainly sounds like you were thrown in to a wide variety of things that have influenced your life ever since. So that's great how those puzzle pieces just come together for someone's life. Because who knew, right? Who knew? How you couldn't have predicted that.
Look, once again, it definitely seemed like it was one of those right place, right time moments. Just like with the career guidance counsellor. If the poster wasn't on the wall, I might not have thought about environmental science. If I hadn't have got the job building swimming pools that was so hard, I might not have gone back to the employment registry and tried to find something that wasn't so giving me so many bad blisters. Yeah, so it was good. I got shouted at by people. I remember one day I was taking some photos, fairly naively. I didn't think he'd mind. I went out to do an inspection at a sawmill where the guy was just burning, all offcuts in a big pit. And I didn't think he'd mind. I just took a photo with the camera, and next thing you know, the guy's boring down the road, yelling his head off at me on a tractor. And it was quite scary. He was mad. I got to experience those types of things, which, at a young age, they wisen you up. It makes you realize you got to think about how people are going to react to you as an environmental scientist or conservationist, however you view yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Particularly when you have that moniker of being a government employee attached to it as well. And I've been a public servant for most of my 25-year professional career as well, and have had a share of people not happy with government as well. So I get what you're talking about, that developing those interpersonal relationship skills, as you talked about, to be able to do your job, but do so in a way that you can meet people where they're at and hopefully bring them along, as opposed to being in such harsh conflict. So tell me what's next. You went surfing you earned enough money to take a 3 month vacation, holiday, to go to Samoa to go surfing for 3 months. So
and that was
what
fantastic.
happens when you get back from the surfing trip? And I'm assuming you realize you need some more income at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. Logged back onto Dad's door, but I managed to get a job with an organisation, like it's an international organisation called Surfrider Foundation. And they started in the States, California, I assume, and by that stage, which was 1994, A guy called Brad Farmer had started Surfrider Foundation in Australia, and there was a national office at a place called Burleigh Heads on the Gold Coast. And I can't remember exactly how I got in contact with them. I think they might have advertised in a surfing magazine saying that they wanted somebody. And so I applied for the job, basically, sent them a letter, sent them a sample of some things that I'd done. I'd submitted a few articles to surfing magazines by that stage. And yeah, went along and met them. And for me, it was, it was just like the pinnacle of anything that I could ever believe, to be able to combine, at that stage, which was my two sort of, my greatest sort of passion, which was surfing, and, something that I was also highly motivated by, which was, the environment. So yeah, I got this job. At the National Office of Surfrider Foundation at Burleigh Heads, and that was a fantastic learning experience as well. It was, it was not science. It was a lot of media. The guy
communication stuff,
real communications and profile building. And I had a couple of real great mentors there, a guy called Matt Keys and another guy called Brad Farmer. Brad at the time was working as a press secretary for an Australian politician. So the ability to write media releases and write well and communicate concisely, and try and excite and convince people were some skills that I picked up there. But I also saw that in that line of work, the convincing of people and you do need to sensationalize things. There are times there where I thought, well, this isn't science either. As I worked in that job for probably 12 months or so, and then around that time, there were a number of other little opportunities, and I ended up having a sort of 2 or 3 jobs at once. I was working for Surfrider Foundation. I'd picked up a little bit of work in a local civil engineering office with a guy who was interested in wetlands for treating stormwater. And I was also working part-time for the Gold Coast City Council. They just started their first ever community-based catchment management group. Just the continuing sort of luck, I guess, of being in the right place at the right time. I ended up, by my association with Surfrider Foundation, who were represented on this community catchment management committee, they knew that they wanted to employ a coordinator, and it was a very sort of small wage, so it was going to be a junior person. And so, I ended up getting that job, and I was the first person employed under the title of catchment management on the Gold Coast. Worked on a little creek called Lotus Creek, which discharged into the Southport Broadwater. And that was a real start for me in terms of, working on multiple projects, looking at things like water quality monitoring, looking at stream bank rehabilitation, preparing educational information, going out talking to groups of school kids. So that was where I guess if I was going to call myself anything, I'd call myself a catchment manager, and being a sort of a specialist generalist, being able to walk within the worlds of education, monitoring, analysis, reporting, governance, communication, and that's I guess where it really started for me in that job.
Well, the parallels between your career path and my career path are I've just been going, wow, this is the first time I've ever actually met you and talked to you. We've exchanged some emails over the past couple of months. But I'm like, I'm 52, you're 52. We've lived very similar lives on other parts of the planet, and
you found yourself in the right place at the right time too, have you?
Right place in the right time. Worked in a civil engineering firm for a while as a construction materials technician. I've worked in communications for the mayor of San Antonio.
Yeah.
Did some private sector communications work for a while before I found myself with the San Antonio River Authority, where, similar to what you just described, had one hand in leading a team of educators, one hand leading a team of communication specialists, and one hand leading a team of intergovernmental relations specialists. Kind of, that was my role for 15 years at the River Authority, of just doing all of those similar things, knowing how to talk to the engineers and scientists and help them translate their language, their technical language into more common everyday speak. So it's I'm just looking at the parallels going, I think you might be my twin brother just from the other side of the other side of the world. So how did you end up getting into the position that you're in now? Because I think you've been with the Tweed Shire Council now for over 20 years. So, in this span of starting your catchment management work, it seems like that evolved eventually into this position that you're in now and have been in for a while. So how did that transition happen?
There was a fair old gap between that my first and that quite junior catchment management job, and to try and summarise it really quickly, there was a lot more travel involved. I met my wife whilst travelling. She's a botanist, and she
nice.
I went to Japan for 6 months and taught English. Lizzie, my wife, she ended up getting a postdoctoral scholarship at the University of Cape Town in South Africa. So we went and lived there for 12 months. Then she's a Brit, so we ended up living in the UK for 2 years, and I did some interesting work over there. But then basically, once again, lobbed back to Australia. Not quite penniless by that stage, recently married, 30 years old. And heard about this job at Tweed Shire Council and applied. It was a 12-month backfill position for my still manager, Jane. She was taking 12 months off to have her second baby. And, I loved the job straight away. I loved the people. I loved the landscape. I loved the scope and the responsibilities. She came back by that stage. It was clear that there was enough work for, me full-time and her part-time as she transitioned back from having babies to, back into a full-time role. I think I might have had a second 12-month contract renewal, and then sometime after that they made me permanent. And here I am still, 22 years later, and I love it. The Tweed Valley, the Tweed River. It's named after the River Tweed in Scotland. It's one of those really Australian colonial type issues that that legacy. It's the traditional owners of the area are the Bundjalung people, number of clans and tribes of the Bundjalung Nation. But the Tweed Shire Council, which is a local government area, our catchment boundary is the same as the river boundary. And the river boundary is geologically spectacular as well, because the Tweed, there was a massive volcano millions of years ago, the Tweed Shield volcano. And what is the boundary of the Tweed River catchment is the caldera, so the highly eroded outer rim, lower flanks of this massive volcano. And so if you look at a sort of like a relief map of the Tweed Shire Council area and the Tweed River catchment, except they're probably the two, like the administrative boundary and the biogeographical or hydrological boundary have probably got about 85% overlap. And so it's an incredibly fortunate position to be in if you're a catchment manager or any sort of water manager. We're our own water supply authority. We run all of our own sewage. We are not affected by anyone else or affect anyone else in terms of our water operations.
Sure.
So it's about as administratively simple as you could ever imagine. I went to Vienna a couple of years ago for a International River Foundation seminar over there and learning about the Danube River that flows through 19 different countries. And I think there might be even more than that, within the catchment. It absolutely blew my mind. So I kind of feel very, very fortunate, but it also makes me feel like I'm under a bit of pressure, because I really think that if we can't do it in the Tweed, no one can.
Sure.
We're a place where people are affluent enough that having fun in the outdoors is something which is accessible to everybody. People are really outdoorsy in this part of Australia, and people really do connect with the environment. We're a relatively affluent part of the world. People are relatively really well educated.
Yeah.
All of these indicators that you need for, successful environmental management, we've got it. And yet still I feel like, we're kind of lagging behind where we need to be, not kicking as high as we should. So yeah, while it's a blessing, I also feel the pressure of expectation. But I think,
Sure.
like a lot of things, I don't think that many other people think about it in those terms, because I'm right in the middle of it.
Yeah.
I see
Yep.
it like that.
Yeah. I can relate to that. And those challenges are real. And it's nice to have someone like you that is continuing to set the bar high, that, your catchment area, your basin, given all of the privileges and affluence that you mentioned, should be doing it well.
Mm.
And, and I think I we'll talk about it in a little bit, but on one hand, I think you are doing it really well because you've been recognized for how well you're doing it. But I like the fact that you're acknowledging, but we're not doing it well enough. We could be doing even better.
Mm.
And I think that's an important acknowledgement, to acknowledge the things that you are doing well, because we are. I mean, there's things that we're doing here in Seattle well, but we could be doing better. There were things, when I was, with the San Antonio River Authority, things we did really well, but things we could be doing better. So I think constantly setting that bar higher and striving for, the best that we could be doing for our community, for the environment that we need to share with other creatures, for future generations to come, that we're, leaving things behind for, either good things or bad things for. I appreciate that there's people like you that are thinking about all those things, tying all those pieces together. So,
Yeah, thanks for that. It's it's been good being affiliated with the International River Foundation and being aware of all of the other similar river management programs around the world.
yeah.
One of which you've been involved with. But as we lined up this interview, I mentioned to you that there's a fellow who I've met called Derek Robeson, who is
Mm-hmm.
effectively my opposite number, managing the River Tweed in Scotland.
Yes.
And it was fascinating talking to Derek, and he's probably somebody who I've spent more time talking to about, the day-to-day river management issues that we deal with, and they're exactly the same.
Yeah.
What Derek is dealing with, there's different species involved, and there's different sort of biogeographic features of the landscape, but yeah, at the end of the day, the five top 10 issues that we're trying to deal with, and the constraints and the sort of the pain points are almost, word for word exactly the same. And it's probably the case in, I don't know what would actually make the correlation highest, because I think it would be different if you were talking to somebody managing a river in Kenya.
Right.
But if you talked about somebody in, a sort of like a Western country where there's pretty high levels of governance, but, where, primary productivity, for example, is a primary productivity, in terms of agriculture, forestry, and then also, similar land ownership structures between Scotland and Australia. Yeah, so then the challenges become very similar as well.
Yeah. Well, that's something I appreciated in my years of participating in some of those international conferences, and the International River Symposium being one of those. Those were the reasons I was in Australia in 2014, in Sydney for the River Symposium that particular year, and I think that's the year the Danube actually won the International River Prize, if my memory serves me correct.
Yeah.
And then 2017, when I was in Brisbane, the river system that I was working for in that period of my time, is we were finalists in 14 and 17 for the International River Prize, and we did win it in 17, but the River Tweed from the Scotland-England border was a finalist in 2017, so I got to interact with some of the folks from the UK as well, and I very much appreciate the connections I've made through those, but also what you were saying, that attending those national and international conferences, it's an opportunity to share the work that's being done, learn from others what they're doing, and you can see the similarities like you talked about there, particularly in some of the more Western economic countries, there's a lot of similarities between what our problems are and what our potential solutions are. The players might be different, the politics might be a little bit different, the species, as you said, might be a little bit different, but fundamentally what the problems are and what some of the proposed solutions are have a lot of similarities. And I always enjoyed going to those conferences, and they were like energy charging for your soul, because you're like, I'm working so hard, and like I know how far we have to go, even though we're being recognized for doing good things, but we're so far away from where we should be. And then, sharing stories with you and others like you that are in the same place, doing great work, being recognized for doing great work, but also knowing they're still so far away from achieving what needs to be achieved. And there's that, I guess, comfort in being in a similar situation with others, even though they're on other parts of the world. So tell me a little bit about, you were, your organization was a finalist as well for the International River Prize, if I'm correct. So
yes, correct.
So clearly you're doing some good work, right? you're being recognized.
Yeah, well,
so tell me a little bit about what what you were being recognized for, and then maybe we can talk a little bit more about where you still need to go, what still needs to be done. But let's talk about some of the things that you're clearly doing well and being recognized for doing well.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Well, like I said, I work for an organisation called Tweed Shire Council. My job with Tweed Shire Council, I'm called the Coast and Waterways Team Leader, and we run an integrated river management program in Australia, or in New South Wales, the state that I live in at least. Local government has the lead role for management of waterways and coasts. There are state agencies that have specific sort of legislative roles, for example, permitting for works within waterways. But we lead and coordinate a range of programs. And what I'm thinking at the moment is that, I think all of the winning International River Prize or National River Prize winning bids have got many similar elements. There's science elements, and there's community mobilisation elements, and there's on-ground works elements. And so we run water quality monitoring programs, and we report to the community on that. As the years have gone by, I'm continually trying to tweak those programs to make them more interesting. And over the last couple of years, we've been using a format called Story Maps, which is a GIS type program where you can scroll through and have multimedia type presentations. And I've been trying to focus in a little bit more on some of our iconic species to tell the story of coastal and waterway health. Osprey is a species that you're probably familiar with. They're a sort of a globally distributed coastal raptor. They're one of my icon species on the coast. And platypus, which you may have heard of, but you wouldn't be familiar with because they're so they're so intrinsically Australian.
Yeah, saw them when I was in Brisbane. We went to we took a half day to go to a wildlife rehab rescue facility outside Brisbane, and got to see all the iconic Australian kangaroos and platypuses. Those are my favorite. So
yeah, so the charismatic megafauna is what people call it. Choosing those icon animals and using them as the exemplar for integrated management of broader habitats. And osprey is something that we've been really trying to use at the moment. We've got a problem with fishing debris, recreational fishing debris, fishermen going out and leaving line and hooks,
nets and lines
behind them. Yep. And so that's using the health of those populations to talk about water quality health. So rather than talking about nitrogen and phosphorus and bacteria, talking about having healthy habitats for osprey, or in the case of platypus, rather than continually beating landowners and graziers with a stick, saying you've got to fence the cows out of the creek because they're crapping in the river and they're affecting water quality. Just talking about the fact that platypus need healthy, stable riverbanks, so they can build their burrows and have their young. So yeah, that's the water, the water quality monitoring and reporting and communication side of things. We do a lot of on-ground work as much as we can, and I guess if I had to pick anything, and probably lots of people would, about what gets me up in the morning most, it's been actually able to go out and restore pieces of riverbank.
Yeah.
We work both in the estuary and in the upper catchment. The most recent project that we've just finished construction on is about a 500 metre length of riverbank in the Tweed River in the mid to upper estuary, where we had really badly eroding riverbanks, and the erosion is caused by a combination of things: flood, lack of riparian vegetation,
Sure.
and to a degree boat wake as well. Our river is popular for power boating,
Sure. That makes sense.
if people are familiar with that, there's a type of power boating or type of recreational use of power boats which is called wakeboarding, where you have boats which are heavily ballasted to create a really large wave, so you can jump over it on your wakeboard.
Right. Right.
You can't get away from the fact that they have a greater potential to damage riverbanks and cause erosion than many other types of boating. And this is not something which is regulated well in our river. So we're forced in some cases to use heavy rock armour to stabilise some of the riverbanks. It's not something that I really like to do. I kind of feel like blasting hard rock out of quarries is probably akin to setting forests on fire in terms of the the carbon emissions. Sure. However, we use the rock as judiciously and as minimally as we can to protect the lower toe of the riverbanks, and then we add as much structural complexity as we can, sometimes by including large hardwood root stumps and root balls into the revetment, and arrangements of timber pins to immediately create, as I was saying, structural complexity, which improves habitat for fish and then opportunities for recreational fishing. But the real key to those projects is then we replant with native riparian species. So in this particular site, which is adjacent to sugarcane farm, and sugarcane farming is one of the biggest land uses on our floodplain, we have been able to plant a 10-metre wide buffer with 1,200 native trees. Well, the trees aren't in yet, but they will be very soon, weather depending. And so, yeah, that's the timber pins and the logs. They provide more fish habitat immediately, but it's after 5 to 10 years of the regrowth of the native vegetation that the long-term ecosystem services and habitat values come into that system. So monitoring and reporting and ecosystem restoration, habitat restoration. And the other thing that I do in my program that I probably spend as much time on as the environmental science is that I'm also the asset owner for all of our public waterways facilities. So jetties, pontoons, boat ramps, boardwalks through mangroves, a couple of small boat marinas. For me, there's a really big asset management element to the operation. I sort of walk in the engineering world as much as the environmental science world, as the team leader at this point in time. But yeah, I'm also very interested and supportive of that. I do have a sort of a big element of boating in my life, and I'm really convinced that if people aren't in the environment, if there's not kids who are burning around the river in tinnies, or people who can get down to the river to fish, you're going to have a much harder time convincing them to put resources into its conservation.
Right. People care about what they'll protect what they care about, or they'll help protect what has value to them, what they use. Right.
Indeed. Yeah.
Right.
So look, it's hard to sometimes, when you just put on the spot, talk about the whole of the program. There's some elements to it without going into the local specifics. And as I said, Tweed Shire Council, we also are our own water supply and sewage authority. So working closely with that engineering pumps and pipes type part of the program as well, just to make sure that we've got a joined up single vision for management of the waterways. And to that end, part of my budget, part of my annual recurring budget, is part of the profit that Tweed Shire Council makes on selling water to all of our resident consumers comes back into my program for, sort of funding some of these catchment protection works.
Yeah. Well, I think something, I just want to backtrack a little bit to when you're talking about some of the restoration work that you're doing. Those stabilizing banks and with revetments, and just to explain to that if somebody's listening to this or watching to this and is not sure what that is, it's a tool that folks like Tom, and correct me if I'm wrong in explaining this, Tom, but it's a tool for basically stabilizing banks, and revetments can be used on rivers or on shorelines, and it's different from a levee. It's not necessarily flood protection. It's more about managing the shoreline, protecting the shoreline, keeping the shoreline stable, not letting it erode or not letting the river shift or move. It's kind of keeping the river where we want to manage it and keep the river. And I heard you describing how you are really trying to use natural materials for that. The root balls and the log pinning, little bit of hard armoring with the rock, but this is a time consuming process as far as reaching full maturity, because the trees have to be planted, the grasslands have to be planted, and those take time to reach maturity. So you might be done with the construction, so to speak, of putting in the root balls and shoring up the construction aspect of it, but the management part takes years and years and years later to allow it to fully be restored and to kind of reach its maximum habitat benefit. So am I capturing that story correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you've hit probably one of the most challenging aspects of all of these projects. Yeah, we do. We always revegetate. Now, in some, the example I just gave of this one that we've just most recently done, it's in the large part of the river that has boat traffic. If we're working in the upper catchment, in the freshwater streams, where you might get a canoe down it, but you're not going to get a ski boat down it. Often we don't need to undertake rock revetment. In those cases, sometimes the most important thing, or the only thing that you need to do, is build a fence to keep the cattle from going down going down into the river. And many people may have heard that Australian soils are particularly vulnerable to hard-hooved animals. No Australian native fauna have hooves, and therefore sheep and cows and horses and goats have had a massive impact on our riparian zones. Yeah, so you can plant the trees. Everyone loves planting trees. It's fun and it's easy. But the issue that we really have around here with highly fertile volcanic soils and about 1.6 meters annual average rainfall per year is weeds. South American weeds in particular. We've got some South American vineweed species which can just take over our plantings. So yeah, we need to put in at least 3, if not 5 years worth of maintenance on all of the plantings. Yeah. And by nature, they're usually pretty long and narrow. The biggest challenge for us is to get a private landowner on board and have them concede some of their land, and usually their best cropping or grazing lands, and have that taken out of production with a fence. Don't need a fence if it's a sugarcane farm, but have that land taken out of production and have it revegetated with tree species. So if you can get 10 meters, you're doing well. If you can get 20 meters, you're doing exceptionally well. But you're still then dealing with a 500, 600, 700 meter long by 20 meter wide strip of vegetation. Yeah. So, the ecological theory of edge effect means that these are hyper disturbed systems. They're never going to be like a piece of native forest with resilience and lack of, they always have weed propagules coming in from flooding. Yep. And so, I think in a sort of a landscape scale, what we are trying to do is shift the amount of riparian vegetation in the Tweed River on a landscape scale. We're trying to provide a proxy of what was the original native pre-disturbance vegetation in those areas.
Yeah.
Trying to provide a similar level of structure and resources that can be utilised by native fauna and perform those roles like stabilising riverbanks and providing habitat for fish and pumping water out of the riverbank soil so they don't just collapse. But we have to accept that in terms of weeds, they're always going to be fairly weedy, and we have to target the weeds that we go back for continually, and particularly some of these South American vineweed species that I mentioned previously, including kudzu, which I understand has been a massive vineweed impact in certain parts of the United States.
Yeah, that's a beast
they're
here
the
too.
ones. Yeah, they're the ones that we really have to go back for almost forever, because they can just tear down the whole canopy.
Yeah, they're hard to get rid of. They keep coming back no matter what you do to them.
Yeah.
So yeah. Well, Tom, I want to be respectful of time. So what before I kind of transition into your call to action and kind of how we close up talking about hope, you did talk about some, there's still room to grow, there's still room to get better. Was that conversation there about some of the vegetation management and issues, is that ties into that, or are there other issues that you're still wanting to progress your catchment into better state of being, a better state of balance?
Look, the riparian restoration is the key building block to the work that we do. It's not rocket science. It's simply rolling it out to as many hectares of stream frontages as we can. And every time we do a project, we basically need to bring a private landholder on board and have them motivated to do that.
Yeah, participate, right.
The biggest challenge that we're just starting to work on at the moment is more along the lines of sea level rise and tidal inundation.
Yeah.
We've got a big floodplain.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned previously, that floodplain is mostly cultivated with sugarcane. And at the moment, the prices for that crop are as good as they've ever been, and the farmers want every square metre of their land that they can to produce that crop on. But we know that in not too many decades that the tide, the salt water is going to be having an inundation impact on a lot of that low level land. And even before that happens, if you and the listeners are familiar with the concept of floodgates, a pipe that leads from the field under a road typically into the river, and it's got a one-way valve on the end. Due to low tides being higher, if that makes sense, the fields aren't going to drain like they used to. So not only are we going to have in 3 or 4 decades time issues of inundation, but within now we already have it, but another decade or another 2 decades, we're going to have what we've started calling drainage impact. And that's basically soils being saturated. And it might not necessarily be a cane farm, it might be a sports field. So drainage impact and developing adaptation plans for that is probably the chapter that we've just really started. I've got a great young guy in my team who's a planner, who's now helping us navigate through all of the legislation and regulations around land use and town planning that we need to start building a new framework for how we introduce this as a new, in some respects, a restriction on how people can use their land, or a public service announcement on how people can expect to be able to use their land in decades. So, the riparian restoration, it just has to keep rolling. But in terms of the new work and the new thinking and opening a big new can of worms, and getting people offside for a whole new set of reasons. It's all about sea level rise and tidal inundation.
Yeah, that's going to be a monster for coastal communities around the globe. I was in Florida earlier this year, meeting with some folks in Fort Lauderdale area, and learning about what they're trying to do what you just described, fight back the sea, but also how do you drain the rainfall? It's kind of this double whammy of a problem with sea level rise, that the rain drainage has nowhere to go, and you're also then being threatened by the saltwater inundation as well. So, and we here in Seattle have some communities particularly on the Duwamish River, that we're looking at those same problems here. So I think every coastal city, you hit the nail on the head. That's the problem to solve in the next 10 to 30 years. That's going to be a problem for all of us.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Tom, what is your call to action now that you've told us all the great work that you're doing there in Australia, and hopefully audience members, podcast listeners, if they're watching or listening, they want to do something. They're activated. They're inspired by what you're doing. How can people help you or support your work, or what can people do in their own communities? What's your advice or call to action for people?
Yeah, look, I think being aware of where your water comes from and the and what long-term sustainability of water supply means. You hear people talking about, people thinking about where their food comes from, but thinking about where your water comes from as well. And there are the biggest. There's this fairly small sector of the population that have the biggest impact on our water supply, and that's the people who own land with rivers or creeks flowing through it in our upper catchment. And there's no legislation, either federally or on state or within our local governments in Australia, that says that your cows can't go and poo in that creek anytime they want. So if I could change one thing in Australia, I would wind back the clock, to where the first European colonisers came, and ask them all if they could please just reserve 100 metres beside every waterway and never clear that. That's obviously never going to happen. But if we could just claw back that land and fill it full of native vegetation, that's the biggest thing that we could do in Australia to promote waterway health and biodiversity conservation. So engaging with those people, or just shifting the needle on society's norms for behaviour. If we could have a social marketing campaign in Australia, 30 years ago, people drank 5 beers and drove home without their seatbelts on, and it wouldn't happen now. If we could sort of try and shift the needle that no landowner really felt comfortable having their cows in the creek, or a creek without native trees on it, that would be fantastic. How you do that is a very complicated and long-term approach.
Yeah,
that I guess is my call to arms. And the other thing is, I guess, for people is just to engage with nature. It's easy for me to say, it's literally behind the computer. It's not hard for me to do. And I can't really conceive of what it would be like to live in a big city where, nature isn't just around the corner,
readily available. Sure.
Yeah, so it's easy for me to say, but I think it's what the world probably needs most.
Yeah. Those are great calls to action. I will put in the show notes for the episode as well a link to the Tweed Shire Council, so folks can get to your website and look you up and learn more about the good works that you're doing there as well. So now we're kind of getting to our last set of questions. Ask the same 3 questions of every guest. It's about hope. We talk about hard subjects here. We're talking about climate change and sea level rise, and the need for repairing and restoring our riparian waterways. These are hard things. These are difficult things. Even the mention of people living in cities that don't have access to green space. I mean, these are hard conversations and difficult things that we're facing. So I like to end every episode, with a upbeat look at hope. And I'm approaching hope from the perspective of those who study it, more from a scientific perspective of hope being you have the ability to have a vision for a better future, and you have some sort of plan of action that you feel you have agency to help implement. Doesn't mean you're going to get there. Doesn't mean there's not going to be problems and difficulties along the way. Doesn't mean you can do it by yourself, but you have this vision for a better future and a sense of agency that you can take steps to make that vision a reality. So I'm going to ask you 3 questions, Tom. Just answer, from your heart or top of mind, whatever the first kind of thing comes to you. Just kind of do a rapid fire question. So you ready to talk about hope?
Yeah, sure. I'll give it a
throw
crack.
the first question at you. First question is, Tom, what's your vision for a better future? It can be for you personally, professionally, or for the world. But what's your vision for a better future?
Yeah, well, I guess my vision for a better future is waterways being given the prominence that they deserve. I just a few days ago I flew across our part of the world and looking at our rivers, and they're basically nude. It's like they've been shaved. They're like a fish with no scales or a person with no skin running through the landscape. For me, I hope that everybody will realise that that's not good enough, and that we need to put the clothes back on on the body, or the fur back on the beast. We need waterways to have trees adjacent to them. That would be, it's only one tiny little thing. I could hope that the war in Ukraine finishes tomorrow. That would be probably just as, if not more valid. But yeah, for me, trees on creeks. I'll just keep it simple.
So why that one? Because there's so many different things you could have picked. Why that particular vision for you?
Well, water quality is so important. Trees on creeks protect water quality. They improve, hydrology and yield within catchments. That we're probably going to be in a more water scarce world. It provides, carbon sequestration, movement corridors for animals. It provides a beautiful landscape. Waterways are, the ultimate utility, but they're also the most beautiful things that you can see. And yeah, if we can't value waterways, if we can't value the arteries of the land, what are we going to value?
We're in trouble, right? So last question. Use your imagination, and we're in the future where what you've visioned is a reality. We have societies who care about our waterways. We've clawed back those riparian habitat corridors, and we don't just have 10 or 20 meters of protection. We're at that 100-meter level of protection. Like, your full vision has come to be, and we're living in that world. How do you feel?
Yeah, relieved, I guess. Vindicated that it, the idea caught on. Yeah, I think the way that what I thought you would probably going to ask is how do we do it? And I'd sort of started thinking, well, perhaps the only way we could do it is if we converted the road budget into the waterway budget. If we all had little pods that we could just hover around in, and we no longer needed to maintain roads and drive gas guzzling cars. And we could convert all of that spend, all of the transport spend, into a waterway management spend. That's maybe how we could get there.
Well, let's hope that future gets there. I'm going to do my part to help your vision come to pass, Tom, because I believe in it as well. I'm so passionate about waterways, and all aspects of the world we live in, but certainly, as you can tell from the river over there, and I've got a mountain lake and rivers over there. They're such an important part of my life as well. So I'll do my part as best I can to help your vision come to reality, Tom. So thank you.
Good on you, Steven.
So much for being part of the program today. I really appreciate your time, and thank your wife for me as well for allowing you to give me just over an hour of your time on your anniversary. And I hope you have a remainder of the day that's beautiful for you, and happy anniversary. So I'll leave it at that, Tom. Thank you so much for being here with me.
Yeah, thanks, mate, and good on you for putting your time into things like this. I hope people get something out of it.
Me too. Thank you, Tom. Take care.
See you later.
Bye-bye. And that brings us to the end of another incredible conversation here on Stories Sustain Us. I want to give a huge thank you to Tom Alletson for joining us today on this anniversary of all days. I really appreciate Tom's inspiring journey. from being an avid surfer to a dedicated environmental scientist and catchment manager. Tom's passion for coastal and watershed management really shone through, and his insights into the challenges of managing our waterways and the pressing issue of sea level rise were enlightening. His call for greater community engagement and awareness around water conservation and riparian restoration is a reminder that we all have a role to play in protecting our precious natural resources. Tom's vision for a future where waterways are truly valued and protected is one we can all rally behind. And I hope his words today have sparked some new ideas and inspiration for you. As we wrap up today's episode, it's clear that coastlines and waterways will face significant challenges in the decades ahead due to climate change. Rising sea levels, increased coastal erosion, and more frequent storms will threaten coastal communities and ecosystems. The loss of wetlands and critical ecosystems, combined with ocean acidification and rising temperatures, will put immense pressure on biodiversity. Heck, it's already putting immense pressure on biodiversity. Saltwater intrusion, as Tom mentioned, changing precipitation patterns, and increased flooding will also impact water quality and availability, as well as the health and economic well-being of communities. And it's not just coastal communities that will bear the burden of more intense ocean storms, as we've recently seen with Hurricane Helene, that not only ravaged the coastline of Florida, but absolutely devastated mountain towns in Tennessee and North Carolina, which are hundreds of miles away from the coast. These challenges highlight the urgent need for community engagement and a shift in how we value and protect our natural resources. As Tom emphasized today, addressing these issues will require collective action and a deep commitment to sustainability. And it starts with each of us. What choices are we making today that will benefit or harm future generations? And who are we electing to lead us in an era that requires courage in the face of difficult policy and political decisions? Election day is just around the corner here in the United States. Please don't sit on the sidelines this election. Get out and vote for the candidates that best match your vision for a better future. With that, I'd like to thank Tom once again for his dedication to making a positive impact. And thanks to all of you for tuning in. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends and family, and subscribe, rate, and review Stories Sustain Us on your favorite podcast platform. Thank you all for your support. I really appreciate it. On next week's episode of Stories Sustain Us, I have an engaging conversation with a first-generation Mexican-Canadian. She's a multilingual, multiculturalism educator, communication specialist, speaker, and author. And she created a global initiative that allows people from around the world to share their experiences with multiculturalism and its intersection with all other aspects of their life. It's a timely conversation about the importance of valuing your own cultural heritage while being open to and appreciating the cultural differences and similarities of others. This episode will be available on October 15th at storiessustainus.com, wherever you listen to podcasts, and on YouTube. Please be sure to stay connected with Stories Sustain Us for more inspiring stories on how we can all contribute to a more sustainable world. Till next time, I'm Steven Schauer. Please take care of yourself and each other. Take care.